Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bookish Hour. I'm Sarah Burr.
And I am J.C. Kenney. Happy Baby Friday evening, folks. We've got a great show for you tonight. We've got an old friend of the show with some fabulously exciting stuff to tell us. So, Sarah, I think it's time to get bookish.
Indeed. And when we say old friend of the show, Rob Samborn, it's a pleasure to have you back and to have almost a full circle moment with you this evening, because you were one of our very first guests that we had on when we were talking about Prisoner of Paradise, which was book 1 in your Painted Souls series. And now we're talking about book 3, the conclusion, and oh my gosh, how time flies. So it's very exciting to have you back. Welcome.
Well, Sarah and JC, it is very exciting to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I didn't realize I was actually one of your first guests. So that is very exciting. Yeah, so it is kind of full circle. Actually, I don't really want to call it like that because I hope to be on your show in the future as well. So we'll do chains of stuff. But yes, but
we're having our story arc here is concluding.
Yes. It is because the book that we're going to talk about, Master of the Abyss, is the third of a trilogy in what's called the Painted Souls trilogy.
And I'm just going to jump in here real quick and say, Rob, we're not giving you enough credit here when we talk about its conclusion. I think, when I read, it is an epic conclusion. I mean, this is like Peter Jackson type, Lord of the Rings type, epic scale, excitement stuff here. So tell us a little bit about book 3.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. That's a pretty huge compliment. So I think to get into book 3, I have to give the viewers a little bit of a summary of book 1. So first of all, I have them here. This is the first book called The Prisoner of Paradise. And The Prisoner of Paradise is about an American couple who traveled to Venice, Italy. And the husband comes to believe that his true soulmate is not his wife, but a woman whose soul has been imprisoned in the world's largest oil painting for 450 years. So it's a dual timeline thriller that's set in the present day and also the 16th century. And through a series of past life regressions, he discovers that he is the soulmate to this woman whose soul has been trapped in this painting. Now, she's been in the painting for all this time, and he's a new soul. He also discovers this secret society who over hundreds of years, dating all the way back to Marco Polo's time and really beyond that actually, has figured out this way of extracting people's souls from their bodies, and then they imprison them as a purgatory of sorts. So this secret society started off for good, but then became corrupt. So the first book is almost like an origin story of sorts, and then the second book, called Painter of the Damned, continues the story. And in real life, so the painting that I was referring to is indeed called Paradise, and it's by a Renaissance master named Jacopo Tintoretto, who is a household name for art history people, but for everybody else, unfortunately, he's not, but he's definitely like in the top 10 with Michelangelo and Da Vinci and people like that, and painted this gigantic painting. And in real life, the main one is in Venice, but he also painted 2 other versions, one in Madrid and one that's now in the Louvre in Paris. And so the secret society, the head of the secret society, this group, the Order, he has his sights set on expanding. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but really like expanding what this group does. So the book kind of continues that and gets bigger in scope. And then the third one, which came out on November 28th, Master of the Abyss, as Jason mentioned, is the conclusion to that whole culmination of it. And the main characters basically get caught up in what becomes this very big international conspiracy it's not really a conspiracy, but for lack of a better word, conspiracy thriller, if you will. And so the wife actually she actually becomes the main character of the trilogy, along with this other character. And she and her friends are up against massive odds to stop this person from getting world domination through a singular religion that he wants to establish.
Well, if that doesn't leave you like ready to go and like figure out what's going on, I don't know what would.
I was about 1,000 pages in 60 seconds, I guess.
We're as the reader, like we're just taken on this wild journey. And I was actually talking about this earlier today, Rob. I was doing a Facebook Live where I just kind of chat with my my page followers and catch up with them. And in talking about you coming on the show tonight, one of the things that I just find so masterful about how you have presented this series is that the way that you have woven these supernatural, paranormal elements into the storyline, it feels just so real and authentic because of how it's introduced to the reader in book one through like Nick beginning to like hear these voices. And once he starts hearing these voices, like, you know, there's something funky going on, but you're like, okay, like, what is it? And you're kind of alongside his wife, Julia, on, you know, figuring out like, is he crazy? Like, what's going on here? And then this whole new like metaphysical realm just begins to be exposed to us. And I just find it to be believable. I guess it's just something that I could feel like this could actually happen. Like if this could happen, it would happen. And I find that to be one of the elements that I have enjoyed most with this series, is that I am just there for the ride because of how it's presented.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. And from the get-go, it was very, very important to me that the fantastical elements in the book did come across as potentially real. And by the way, I mean, there's plenty of people who believe in souls. So if you believe in souls, then anything that really could revolve around the concept of a soul could potentially be real. Now, there are a couple of other things in the book for the readers that are a little bit more fantastical than souls. However, they're actually connected to that. And I don't want to give it away because it actually is a big reveal in the first book and then also beyond. Again, like I wanted to portray and present it as potentially real. And then also when they have past life regressions, that's another thing that I wanted to come across as real as possible. So pretty much everything that happens in the past in the books actually happened in real life. Other than, so like any of the real people were real. I know that sounds weird, but like the celebrity people, I guess you could say, were actually real people. All the buildings were real, the events were real, all that stuff really did happen.
Well, and that's one of the things, you know, for folks who still may be trying to get their heads around your series. To me, a couple of really, at least I think, spot on comparisons. You know, whether you want to talk about Dan Brown's novels, you know, with like the Da Vinci Code and some of those types of things, or American Treasure, the American Treasure movies, because again, you have these, with both of those types of stories, you have these historical elements, these fantastical elements where, you know, it's easy to say, oh, come on, that can't have really happened.
Right.
But maybe it did. And then you're swept along for this just fabulous ride. So first off, I again, you know, want to just say, you know, super kudos to you for this amazing series. But can you talk about, and I've asked you this before, but I'd like you to do it again, talk about the research in the wedding of that historical, the true historical information into how you are able to so seamlessly weave that into this great story set in the present.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research, thousands of hours of research, and I even took a research trip to Venice for this. Unfortunately, I didn't take one to Madrid or Paris. And by the way, Master of the Abyss for the viewers goes beyond that. So there are other scenes that are throughout Europe. And I don't think I'm spoiling it too much to say that there are chapters that take place in Asia. And, to your point about like Dan Brown's books and the National Treasure movies, people knock them as kind of like kitschy and stuff like that. But the reality is that,
not here.
Yeah, I love them too. I mean, look, everyone can agree that they're fun, right?
Yeah.
I think people may knock them that they're not necessarily highbrow. But what, to your point, JC, is that like the research that goes into all of Dan Brown's books and also the National Treasure movies was probably astounding. And then I think the beauty of it is that they take a lot of like what you're saying, like actual historical fact, and put it into this entertaining type of thriller context. So yeah, and that's another thing, in addition to making all of the fantastical elements as real as possible, I also wanted to ground the reader. And I think it actually is kind of an extension of that. So I wanted to ground the reader as much as possible in things that really happen. So like, and put them in places that really might exist to this day. So yeah, I did a lot of research for all three books.
I just want to say that when I was watching the movie A Haunting in Venice, and they were making references to places around the city that you had brought up in your book, I was like, oh my God, like I remember that from Rob's book. And so it's really cool to see how that has, it's almost like a tour guide of these amazing, incredible structures and locations across Europe.
One of my dreams, sorry to interrupt you, but one of my absolute dreams would be if, the books were these smashing successes and actual tour guides created, like these spots in the books kind of tour. That would be pretty cool.
And it may happen. You never know. Because again, you're just transported there so vividly. And real quickly, saying hello to our viewers who are joining us live this evening.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us and chiming in. If you have any questions for Rob along the way, please feel free to pop them into the chat. So without giving away, and this is going to be kind of our kind of a disclaimer, I think, for every question that we're going to have this evening, because I think, we really, if you haven't read the first two books in the series, like we don't want to give away what's really happening in the third. But I do.
So go buy those two books now. Well,
yes.
Buy all three, and you know what you need to do.
And so hopefully, Rob, you're able to answer this question. But I would love to know more about kind of the shift in main characters and whether or not that was always your goal, or if that was just something, because we have book one where Nick is very much the focal point, and then Julia kind of steps into the frame and begins to take control of things. And I would be interested to know, like, was that always the plan, or was that something that her character just naturally grew into?
That's a fantastic question, Sarah. I'm glad you asked that. And I think you might actually be the first person to have asked that. So it was not always the plan. In fact, I originally wrote The Prisoner of Paradise as a script, as a standalone script. And it was optioned by a production company founded by DreamWorks execs, actually, which was pretty cool. But it was never made into a movie, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, probably unfortunately, even with everything that happened. But when the rights reverted back to me, then I decided to adapt it into a book. And during that process, the first book itself organically grew and evolved into so much more. And then just naturally, the story kind of blossomed and mushroomed out of that. And it was a very, very organic process that Julia, who is the wife of the main character in the first book, ends up becoming the main character really of the series. And there's another character named Carlo who becomes a very, very important character as well. But I would say that it overall, of the arc of the entire three books, it's really becomes Julia's story. And that's what I was saying before, is that like you could look back on The Prisoner of Paradise book one as an origin story of sorts. So I think that she has a pretty cool character arc. So in answer to your question, it was definitely not the original plan. and entirely happened organically, really, because of her actions and her situation that she gets into, and I suppose the actions of the people around her.
Sometimes, or go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to follow up with, because you had brought up Carlo. One of the things, and this is definitely like my geeky reader side coming out, is, we have our favorite supporting characters, I think, when we're reading a book, and we're always like kind of secretly wishing, like, oh man, like I wish this person would like get their own thing going on, because you really connect with them, and yet like, okay, like this isn't their story. But in this instance, we kind of are treated, at least I was treated, because I really liked Carlo's character in Prisoner of Paradise, and so the fact that like we got more and more of him throughout the series, I think was just a big bonus for me.
That's cool. Well, thank you.
Something that I kind of would like to follow up also on is you mentioned that Prisoner of Paradise started out as a film script, and then went into book form. What about the books 2 and 3? Did they start out as scripts, or were they just straight to the novel? And can you talk a little bit again, and again, I know I'm repeating myself here, but kind of fill us in again about the challenges between script writing and novel writing?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of that question, I never wrote them as scripts. They went straight into novel form. Now, I did outline them both concurrently, because while I was writing The Prisoner of Paradise, I came up with the idea for the whole trilogy. And I should also point out, by the way, that it goes a little bit beyond the trilogy, because, they're dual timelines. So the nice thing about that is that I can find a particular thread and then continue that. So I actually released a novella called The Swordsman of Venice, which follows the journey of of Nick's past life. In fact, it actually picks up from the very first chapter of the very first book. And so that first part is out, and I'm working now on the second part. So anyway, yeah, so I wrote them straight as a novel, as novels, I should say, but I did outline them concurrently, and I'm a big outliner. So my outline for those 2 books, the outline alone, I think, was like 75,000 words.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just to let you know, for me, that's a book.
That's a book.
Like a book.
Wow.
Tell me. Well, that was for 2. Tell me about it. It was a lot. Now, it did make the writing process easier because I had everything kind of outlined. It was almost like the first draft, I guess you could say. But and then the second part of your question, there really are a lot of challenges to both. I like making the analogy that it's like playing the same song on 2 different instruments. And I'm also fascinated with the concept not only of adaptation, but how you can tell the same story in different ways. Like, I love that. Like, I love when a movie comes out, or even a book, where it's just like this totally unique take on something like Shakespeare or something like that, where some people are purists, which is fine, and they hate that. I kind of love it, because I love the creativity of taking that story and making it into something new. And I think that that's really important for the human experience, because all of us are either storytellers or story lovers, and they say there's only like 7 stories out there or whatever, right? So it's really interesting to hear the different ways of being able to tell a story. So that's kind of the way I look at it with screenwriting and novel writing. And in addition to that, there's obviously craft techniques and things like that. You're bound to different structures and formats and grammar. With screenplays, you have a much more finite page count, for example. With books, it's much more important to be grammatically perfect, for example, things like that. Screenwriting, you need to know like camera angles, and not really, but anyway, stuff like that, right? And I'm actually currently adapting our mutual friend's book. So I believe you both know Laura Kemp and her amazing book called Evening in the Yellow Wood. And we are collaborating on an adaptation of her book into a screenplay. And it's been a fantastic process. And she's been amazing to work with, because she's very open to this concept of knowing that it needs to change to be able to become a movie. It's so interesting. It's like a lot of people are always like, oh, the book was so much better than the movie. But, there are many cases where the movie is better than the book. And I'm not saying this about Laura's, by the way, by any stretch of imagination. But people need to be cognizant that you have to make changes when you're changing a medium that's completely in your head to something that you're actually watching and listening to in a much shorter period of time. So she's been wonderful to work with in that regard.
I very much agree with the, I've always approached it as, it's two different mediums, two different stories. And I had like growing up, I was just completely obsessed with the Harry Potter series. So they were really my first exposure to having a favorite book go to the movies and having to kind of reconcile, like, okay, like, why did they make these decisions? Still loved it more than anything, but it was like, oh, like it was a very eye-opening process, I guess, even just being a viewer, to see like, oh, like the differences and the direction that you have to go in order to fit that movie medium.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people, Harry Potter is a great example of what's widely considered to be one of the greatest book to film adaptations ever. Partly because it's true to the books and also true to the themes of the books, but also expands it and brings it alive on film. Ditto with the Lord of the Rings series.
Oh, yeah.
As well. Yeah.
And that's where I would say on the other side of the coin, you have Blade Runner. Because, do androids dream of electric sheep, and Blade Runner are, even though the book is the source material, the final film or the director's cut or the extended cut or however many 5 million different cuts there are, they're so different than from the original book. So kind of along that line then, Rob, one of the things, if I could tap into your screenwriting expertise, is I've read or I've heard that in general, a typical full-length movie is maybe 150 pages of a screenplay or less. Really? Okay.
Well, here, the general rule of thumb is 1 page equals 1 minute of film time, screen time. Okay.
Really? Okay.
So when I say less, these days movies tend to be a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. For better or for worse. So 150 page script would be a 2.5 hour movie. Now, for anyone who's listening and thinking, oh, I'm going to go write a 150 page script and it's my first script, no one's even going to pick it. No one's even going to look at it if they know it's that long. So for a spec script, one that you write on speculation, which is basically anybody who has not had a credit or anything made or et cetera, or you're not a director, for example, or you're not an actor, whatever, then it needs to be under 120 pages. So it really does depend upon the genre, and 120 pages is the absolute max. And really, honestly, I think most producers and agents wouldn't even look at a 120 page script unless they knew that it was either some like total epic where it's understandable, or maybe based on a true story, that kind of thing where it's understandable, or based on source material. And even then, if it's based on source material, it better be worth it to make it that long. Otherwise, the typical range, again, depending upon genre, everything from horror and romance to period pieces, etc., is usually about 88 pages to 115 pages for a spec script.
And that's for a movie, not a television episode, correct?
Correct. Yeah. For a TV episode, it would, be commensurate with however long the show is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Now, people like Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese, who come out, they can do whatever they want. So they can write 180 page scripts.
All I know is that when I see like the time of movies these days, it's like if anything is over like 2 hours and 15 minutes, it's like, nope.
I think it's
for me as the viewer.
Yeah, I think it's because either people, studios are cognizant of the fact that not that many people are going to the movies and it's expensive to go, so they want people to get their money's worth. And then that translates to streaming. And then even the stuff that's straight to streaming, it's like they want them to stay on that streaming network and things like that. Now, the other thing is like, in a movie, there could be something that's maybe 20, 30 seconds long or even longer, but it's like one line, where if it's some like establishing shot, or it's, kind of operatic in a sense, where they have like the music and they're focusing on the person, that kind of thing. I'm thinking of Dune.
Yeah. Oh man, I had no idea that Dune was going to be a 2-part movie, and so I'm like, why? It's like, when are we going to get to like the resolution? Like, this seems like it's going to be long, and then it just ended. I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Well, we needed that as a fan of the novel. I that was one of those where I appreciated Denis Villeneuve's long first half, because do yourself a favor, if you've never watched the David Lynch version from the 80s, don't. It's
different ways of telling the same story, right?
It has its place. It has its place, but that kind of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I love the new one as well, but like, to Sarah's point, what I was saying before is kind of like what I was alluding to, is that there was probably about 10 too many slow operatic desert scenes with the close-up and
yeah. So kind of along that line, that brings up another question I'd kind of love to get your thoughts on. With so much of television now going to serialized storytelling, we obviously go back to The Sopranos, but then so much now, I wonder if as you are writing your novels with The Prisoner of Paradise and then the next two, if there is thought of, this would make a great, 10 episode, series on HBO or whatever.
100%. It's interesting that I originally wrote it as a film feature script, but without question, I would prefer it to be a series, because it's longer and you get to really kind of expand on literally everything that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the series would probably be truer to the book. And again, I'm okay with different tellings of the same story, but I do think that a series would be better.
I think that when I was first starting out with my own writing, I was like, this is going to be a great movie someday. But because of how the medium has shifted, it's really that in-depth storytelling. And because we've been exposed to so many great productions that are high quality and they're delivering us these wonderful stories, that's my preference too. I think that's
both
the way
of your
to go.
Actually, both of your books, all of them that you write, I think are a little bit more conducive to series for sure.
Yeah, it's like a mystery in episode.
Yeah, that's what I've kind of thought, is that I'd like to think if it would ever happen, that I'd be kind of like the Murder, She Wrote. I've got one 48-minute episode will wrap everything up. So it's episodic. That's great. But Rob, yours, there's so there's so much going on. And also when you add in the fact, obviously, of the dueling timelines and some of the globe-trotting aspects, that really, I think we've gotten to the point as TV or movie viewers, that we're to a certain extent, there's an expectation that, when you have an epic story like you do have, 1 2.5 hour film, or, that's just not going to cut it.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that, shows traditionally used to be only 22 episodes. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like 8, 10 episodes.
You're lucky,
or who knows? So yeah, I think like with mine, it would be great if it was like a season per book.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Probably like 8 to 10 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Rob, you mentioned that you are currently writing, is it another novella that is from Angelo's perspective, or is the universe, because you've finished Master of the Abyss, is the universe completed, or what else is there to explore, I guess, at this point?
So great question, and thank you. So what I'm currently working on, in addition to the adaptation of Laura Kemp's book, is The Swordsman of Venice Part 2, which is indeed the continuation of Angelo's story. So not too many spoilers here, but the very first, as I was mentioning, the very first. So Angelo Mascari is the main character of Prisoner of Paradise's past life. A minor spoiler there, I guess. But and the book opens in 1589 in Venice, and we don't know exactly what's going on, but we know he's in trouble. These guys try to attack him, and he escapes Venice under cover of darkness while like arrows are flying around him. And then all the other flashbacks in the book, again, minor spoiler, happen before that scene. Okay. So we don't actually know what happens to him until a scene that occurs in Master of the Abyss. So, and there's about a 20-year span. So the Swordsman of Venice follows his journey in that 20 years. And it's actually pretty cool. He goes to the New World. So the first part is him essentially escaping Italy. And then the second part is what happens with him in the New World, and all connects back to the secret society that I was mentioning, which is this religious order. And it's all connected. And there are hints in the second and third books that are directly tied to that. And then in terms of the universe, after I'm done with that, it's probably going to be wrapped up. I have left some threads in Master of the Abyss, and I have some ideas if I want to pick it up, but I'm really, really anxious to actually get a whole other series going.
Oh,
yeah.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about what you're looking to do, or maybe what genre you're looking to explore, or what themes that you want to tackle next?
So I have a whole other series in mind, which I'll talk about in a second, but what I'm going to do first, so I've actually completed 9 feature scripts, 5 of which were options, so I know that they're good, I guess. They're never made. Good, kind of good, I guess. And incredibly, even though I adapted the script for The Prisoner of Paradise into a book at this point, probably about 75 years ago, up until maybe about 5 months ago, it had never occurred to me to do the same with any of my other scripts. And then I had like this light bulb moment where like the light really said like dummy on it. And so I was like, oh my God, I actually have at least like 5 other scripts that I can easily adapt into books. So I've settled on 2. One is basically like an international spy thriller, all set in the present day. And the other one is actually a period piece set in the 1920s on the Red Sea. That's actually based on a true story. Nice. And so I'm going to adapt both of those into books, probably as standalones, even though both of them can be series. And then from there, I am going to write a series of historical thrillers. So books that take place in the present day, but all involve history and will probably have historical scenes in them.
Ooh.
Those I love those stories, just because it's so much fun when you're reading or watching, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, that's somebody real.
Yeah, so they're basically going to be like National Treasure, but more. Some of them will be actually focused on America, but mostly international. So International Treasure.
It sounds like we have a lot to look forward to, which is really exciting. And I mean, amazing to have just this trove of stories that you can go back to, and that you have kind of the bones or the skeleton to work from to then assemble it into a novel.
That's exactly why I'm doing it, I'll admit, because they are done, completely done. And so I can use the scripts as outlines or blueprints, really, and write fairly quickly, so I can pump them out pretty quickly. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, I do want to take a second to let everybody know we're about halfway through the show. So if you got any questions for Rob, please feel free to drop them in the chat, because before we know it, we're going to have to say goodbye, but we don't want to do that yet. Rob, before, we get too far away from, Nick and Julia, I'd kind of like to talk. I'd like to get your take on their relationship, because we know they're married, and you talked a little bit about how Nick is kind of or I wouldn't say kind of, Nick's the main character in the first book, then it shifts over time, and without giving too much away, there's a lot that goes on in that relationship between the two. So I was just kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about Nick and Julia as husband and wife, and just kind of how you envision them and how their relationship changed in your head over the course of the 3 books.
Yeah, that's a great question, JC. So they are they're a genuinely very happy couple. So first of all, they're young, they're like 28, no kids, and they go to Venice on kind of a working vacation. So Julia is a fine arts photographer, and she actually wins a prize for one of her photos in what's called the Venice Biennale, which is a real thing, and it's this biannual huge art exhibition. In fact, I think it's the longest running art exhibition in the world, something like that. So it's a really, really big honor. So they decide to make like a kind of a working trip out of it where they're going for her photo, but also to take a 3-week vacation in Italy. So, again, they're 28, they're having fun. And so they do have this great relationship, but you can see from the beginning that there might be some cracks on the surface, not huge cracks, but maybe some cracks, enough where like if something were to happen, those cracks would open. However, they definitely are very, very devoted to each other and very much in love. And throughout the series, even though, again, I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but let's just say something happens to Nick, Julia is still very, very much is supportive of him, because she does realize, so I did reveal before that he comes to believe that his true soulmate is this woman from a different life. Now she has a hard time grappling with that. Another thing that I could reveal to the readers is that before the book even starts, Nick did suffer a traumatic head injury. So she actually, this guy's like talking to a painting and thinking that he's in love with a woman from the 1500s. So she is very concerned for his well-being until she does see that this is all real. But even after that, she recognizes that it could happen, and it's also out of his control. And also, even though maybe Nick is not her soulmate, he did indeed, or does indeed, love her, and she loves him and still wants the best for him. So for most of it, he's the driving force of her actions, because the reality is that she can get on a plane and go home and get out of this adventure at any point in time.
Yeah.
But she's doing this for him. And then later on, as I was mentioning earlier, everything gets a lot bigger, and she does come to realize that it's all way bigger than her and Nick. So ultimately, she's doing it for the greater good, but she's still in love with him and trying to do the best for him.
And one thing that when I began reading Master of the Abyss, I had forgotten that, this is all happening in a very short amount of time. I think it's like the Master of the Abyss is like 2 weeks after the events that are happening in Venice, or
it's roughly. It's maybe about the whole entire thing from the beginning of the Prisoner of Paradise to the end of Master of the Abyss, I think, is about 6 or 7 months. And so Master of the Abyss starts maybe about 3 weeks after. Yeah.
And so the fact that these characters, you see them growing so rapidly and adjusting to these hurdles that are thrown at them. But one character that I'd be remiss not to mention, because I don't like the bad guys, but I love a good villain. And I would love to talk about Della Porta, because he vexed me so much, because there were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I kind of agree with him. Or I felt like I understood where his motivations were coming from. And I just thought that was such a masterful way to present a villain where we're feeling sympathy. And even though we know that he's this terrible, terrible character, no spoilers, but the betrayals that he feels is I feel those betrayals for him. And so I'd love to get your feedback on how it was creating him as your antagonist.
Well, thank you for all those compliments. I really appreciate it. And so for the viewers, the main antagonist's name is Salvatore della Porta, and he's Venetian, and he's the head of this ancient religious order that we were talking about before. And as I mentioned earlier, the order itself started as a force for good, but then kind of corrupted themselves because they had so much power. Power begets corruption, or absolute power. And so I love bad guys who have gray areas in them. And so he has a lot of gray area, but the group that he's running, the order, also has a lot of gray area and a lot of history as well. So he genuinely believes that what he is doing is for the betterment of humanity. But he wants to be at the helm and controlling it all, and will really do anything that he needs to do to make sure that nothing or that nobody is in his way of achieving those goals. And his goals are very, very lofty. And I can reveal this because it's actually in the book description of Master of the Abyss, and we alluded to it before. So because this group has the power of extracting people's souls, they actually are aware of the existence of essentially an afterlife. Like, they have definitive proof of souls. They know about of the afterlife and everything. So essentially, it's the one veritable or verifiable religion that they have founded. And it's kind of a combination of Christianity, or Catholicism really, and Buddhism. And they've meshed those two into one. And the order has always been in the shadows this entire time. But what he wants to do is make it public and make it the world's one veritable religion, but rule essentially with an iron hand. And any dissenters they themselves will be imprisoned. But he thinks that by doing that, he's actually going to achieve world peace, right? Like, imagine if there really was one religion that people could prove was the one. If you think about that obviously there would always be fractures and factions and things like that, and dissenters, and but in general, most people on the planet would probably follow that one if there really was proof. So he believes that and thinks that he's actually going to bring world peace by doing that. But again, he's going to rule with an iron hand, and it doesn't matter who dies for him to achieve his vision. So yeah, so like I love good, well-drawn antagonists, and then especially antagonists who have a lot of gray area in them.
Yeah, I tell you what, that I got in trouble with my kids because, again, going back to film, when Black Panther came out, I told both of my kids that I thought Killmonger was a better character than T'Challa. And they were like, oh, how can you say that? It's like, he's such an interesting bad guy with some really good points if you kind of take a look at it.
It's true. Yeah, it's a great point. It's a good example. Yeah.
Were there any
and even Thanos, actually, sorry.
Oh, no.
Thanos was kind of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to correct the universe, I guess, but by killing half of
it. There are so many in thinking about, that mindset of, I'm doing this because I believe that it's right, and I believe that this will save people. And that's a really, it's an interesting perspective to paint a bad guy at, because it's like, well, can you really fault them for trying to make the world a better place, even if they're misguided from how we would view such a thing?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like those types of bad guys because they're fascinating, and it's kind of, and I think people also try to put themselves into the shoes of those bad guys as well. Like, what would you do in those circumstances?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Rob, I feel bad because we've only got about 15 minutes left. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, your series in and of itself, that it's had a little bit of a change of direction. Started out with one publisher, kind of ran into some challenges, and found a new life, as it were, under a new publisher. And so I'd like to, if you could tell us a little bit about your new publisher, and because it sounds like a really cool concept, and how all that happened.
Yeah. So I think that not that I'm, a celebrity, but I think that this is fairly public knowledge of what happened, for anybody who knows me anyway. So I originally did have a 3-book deal with an independent press called Touchpoint Press, who, let's just say, I was not particularly happy with for a number of reasons. And I can also reveal that I am certainly not the only author who had those feelings. In fact, there are probably about 3 dozen, if not more. And so because of the myriad of issues that I had with them, that are still ongoing to this day, actually, my agents were able to negotiate the rights for all 3 books back to me last May. So that was after the first 2 came out, but before the 3rd one came out. And so I am with a new kind of publishing startup called Lost Meridian Press. So right now it's very small and has a select number of authors in it, but they're fantastic. They really, it's almost like a white glove approach where it's kind of taking, it's almost like, because the publishing industry has evolved and changed so much, where Lost Meridian Press is almost like taking a step back to make sure that what they focus on is the right things to focus on, and make sure that all of the authors have the attention that they need. So it's been a great experience.
And I think if I last checked Amazon correctly and read the numbers right, that the Prisoner of Paradise, I think, is currently 99 cents on ebook.
It is. I thought you were going to say something else. But
well,
yes,
I also know that it was I know that there was some number 1s going around as well.
I saw a few orange flags there.
Yeah. So yeah, it actually hit number 1 in all 3 of its categories that it was in at the time. And by the way, I don't know if you guys have this problem, but my categories are constantly changing, and it drives me crazy. And most of the categories I choose, that are there, are not categories that I want. It's really annoying. Like General Italy travel guide. So if anybody sees that, listen, that is not me. That is not Lost Meridian Press. That is Amazon. I don't know if it's the algorithm or someone thinking like, oh, there's a picture of Venice. This must be a travel guide. So
it's the people putting together the tour based on your book locations.
Yeah, right. That's true. Maybe like I said, it is a dream of mine. So yes, it did indeed hit number 1 in all 3 categories that it was in. I think it's still number 1, maybe in 1 or 2 of those. And yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. This week only, it is the ebook anyway. The ebook is currently 99 cents, not only on Amazon, but on every platform that ebooks are sold on. So if anybody wants to check out The Prisoner of Paradise, which again is book number 1, the ebook is 99 cents until I think Saturday night.
Yeah, I tell you what, folks, that is an absolute steal.
Get it.
You all need to get that book. You will lose sleep because you're going to be up late reading it. But it is so worth it. God, that is such a good book. Such a great introduction to the series.
Thank you.
So Rob, what, as we kind of, we're coming to a close of our Master of the Abyss experience and discussion. If there's anything that you that people who may be on the fence still, if they haven't been totally hooked and enthralled by our conversation, what would be some themes or I guess themes is the right word. Themes that you think that this book really highlights that, for people that enjoy learning or reading about such and such would really be interested in your book, if they're not already.
I think there are 2 driving themes across the series. One is that just because 2 people might be soulmates doesn't necessarily mean that they're destined to be together. And the other is absolute power corrupts absolutely, but that does not mean that we need to let it happen. So boiling that down into a nutshell, I suppose, one is love, and the other one to always fight for your love. Actually, I guess they're both kind of about fighting for what's right. But like one is like fight for your love, and the other one is that justice is always worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are kind of the driving themes of both books. And then beyond that, for people who do like international locations and things that might revolve around the love story. However, there's a lot of action. There's a lot of thriller. There's a mystery that spans multiple timelines. It also involves art and art history and things like that. I think that people would enjoy it.
I think those, especially the love and justice, those are definitely themes that we can get behind. Mm-hmm. Real quickly before we kind of segue into our last segment. These are, if I remember correctly, these are on audiobook?
The first two are on audiobook, and Master of the Abyss, the audiobook, is coming out on, I think, March 23rd.
Nice.
Oh, cool. So that'll be here before you know it. Real quickly, what was, from just like a author standpoint, what was it like hearing your work as told through somebody else?
Oh my God, I love it. So first of all, sorry, it's April 23rd is the date of the Master of the Abyss audiobook release. And I want to give a plug to the narrator, whose name is Zach Alleman, who I think is one of the best in the business. I listen to a ton of audiobooks, so I'm always reading a book and always listening to a book, partly because of time, but also, like I'm walking the dog in the car, et cetera, I'm always listening to the audiobooks. So I listen to a ton. And Zach, I want to say I got lucky, okay? This is not about me at all. I really, really did get lucky. And I can gush over him because he is amazing. As you both know, and as I've described, the books take place over multiple timelines. There's numerous characters from multiple different countries, genders, ages. There are some scenes where there are 8 people in the room from different countries and stuff. And that is not easy to read, let alone with accents and, remembering the accents of everybody. And he nails it every single time. And I'm sort of smiling to myself because did I put in some scenes in Master of the Abyss as a challenge to him? I'm not going to reveal that. But I had it in my head. So the books are published by Tantor Media. The audiobooks are published by Tantor Media, who's been wonderful as well. I love them. And anyway, getting back to your question, how does it feel? Like I said, I love it, and this actually circles back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, like different ways of telling a story. Mm-hmm. And I feel like even an audiobook, when someone is reading the words on the page, it's still another way of telling the story. So I love that. I love that it's being brought to life, and it's a fantastic feeling. I love listening to it.
That's awesome. And to your point about, another way to tell the story, I had a conversation with the voice artist who does my audiobooks. We did a bookish moment together, and I was telling her, it's like, sometimes the way that you say something it's not even a way I knew that could be said, and you said it exactly as it should have been. Like, how did you know that that's really what I was getting at, even if I couldn't really formulate the words to tell her that that's how it should have been, that was the dialogue expressed. And she's like, it's in the story, it's in your words. So the fact that it is the same story and it's just being, brought to this, the layers are being pulled back even further. It's such a cool experience.
Yeah, I think that there need to be more Grammys for audiobooks. Mm-hmm. It's really an art. Exactly to your point, it's like they are reading it and they're really acting it out. I mean, they're acting as well. So much goes into it. So I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but when they're done right, they're fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Very much agreed. And that's a really good cue for what are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you consuming? Any recommendations that you can impart on our audience tonight?
Yeah. So first of all, before I get to what I'm currently reading, because actually I just wrapped it up and it's one of my favorite audiobooks, is The Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Oh, so nice.
I was a big fan of the graphic novels. I want to, for the record, cannot stand the show on Netflix. It is absolute garbage. So if anyone saw the show, do not let that influence you, because the show is horrific in every single sense, from the acting to the special effects. Sorry if you both love them. Love it. I cannot stand it. Now, the audiobooks, though, are a revelation. Like, they are a new form of storytelling. So they're almost like old style radio programs where they have multiple people in the cast and sound effects and music and stuff like that, but elevated to the present day with present technology. So they have like A-list actors. I mean, James McAvoy is a star. They have casts of like 40 or 50 people. And so far there have been 3 volumes. Each volume is based upon a series of the original graphic novels. And I just wrapped up number 3, which is amazing. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. Now, I should say a trigger warning. It is not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of horror and gruesome stuff. There is violence against women that some people do find gratuitous and might be. But other than that, I definitely recommend it. Now, what I'm reading now, so for audiobooks, is I'm listening to Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, which so far I like. Interesting though, incredibly well written, but I feel like I need to get a little bit more sucked into the story, but I'm only maybe about like 15-20% in. And I'm also wrapping up an historical thriller, or really kind of like, I don't know, archaeological thriller, I guess you could say, called The Enigma Strain by Nick Thacker.
Yeah.
He's a great writer in that genre, and he's a friend of mine. And then I'm nearly done with that though. So I'm going to switch over to another book called A Second Chance for Yesterday, by an author named R.A. Sin, which is actually an amalgamation of another friend of mine named Aram Sinreich and his sister. And that's a sci-fi book.
Nice.
And then I just finished watching A Murder at the End of the World, which I highly recommend.
Oh, yeah.
Have you both seen it?
That's been recommended to me by my friends, and I'm like, I want to get to it. It's on the to watch list.
JC, have you seen it?
I started. I've got to be honest. This is a difficult time of year for me because of the weather. So it was a little dark given the setting. So I decided I'm going to wait until I get more sun before I pick it up again. But
Yeah.
I watched the first episode and it was fantastic.
So do you suffer from seasonal weather disorder or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah, so do I actually. Yeah, that's a good point. I still liked it though, but lately I feel like every show I watch has just been garbage. But that show I really, really liked, and it also is about the main character is a writer, so I loved how they brought that in as well. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I just last night started the movie Saltburn, which is people rave about. Now it's definitely a slow burn, and it's interesting. It's one of those movies where I think the characters and the story and the setting is cool enough, plus the hype, to keep me going. But I am almost halfway through, and I feel like, okay, I really need some sort of plot at this point. It might be about 40% through.
Yeah. All right. Sarah, how about you?
So on your recommendation, JC, I started watching Death and the Other Details, and I'm hooked. I'm so hooked. I'm loving it. And from a reading standpoint, I finished Leah Dobrinska's new rom-com, which is called Enemies Don't. It was so good. I absolutely loved every moment of it. It comes out next week, February 13th. It's so delightful for folks that like rom-coms. It's perfect. And then for what I am also watching, for my anime fans out there, I just got into Solo Leveling, and there are so many, regular person in this world who's transported to like some magical world where they gain magical powers and become a wizard or something like that in the anime genre. But this one really twists it and puts it on its head, and it's done very, very well. Very much enjoying it.
Cool.
What about you, JC?
So I just finished a couple of days ago a book by a mystery author called DM Me for Murder by some Sarah E. Burr. So
it's on my list.
Yes, yes. I tell you what, I loved it. Coco and the squad. It was great. I've posted my review today, so I'm not going to go on about it. But Sarah, bravo, or brava, I should say. Wonderful book again. And for what I'm watching, there's nothing really new to report. Still working on Psych, and so I'm halfway through season 3 of Psych, and Sean and Gus are still every bit as fun as ever. Just finished Miss Scarlet and the Duke season 4, which was a lot of fun. We're still on a little bit of a cliffhanger here.
Is that a Bridgerton thing?
It is. I'm watching it on PBS. It's a period piece set in the 1880s. Miss Scarlet is a female detective in London. And she has the Duke is William Wellington, who is a detective inspector at Scotland Yard. And so the two of them, investigate stuff together. And so it's a lot of fun. And I love my period piece mysteries. So those are just a couple of things.
It sounds like, so we've got some really good recommendations. Rob bringing in a lot of new ones that we haven't heard of yet. So that's always a wonderful way to end our bookish hour together. Rob, it's been wonderful having you here, catching up, talking about Nick, Julia, the conclusion, and what's next. It's always great to see you. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
And JC and Sarah, thank you so much for having me again on the show. It's always so great to be on the show. I wish we could do this in person. I feel like, we should be sitting around at a bar drinking. And we could do this for hours.
We have to take this on the road at some point, figure out how to get our technology so that we can travel around.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Thank you so much for reading my books and for all the kudos. I'm thrilled that you love them. And it's been fantastic, chatting with you again.
Well, again, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. And to our viewers who joined us live, thank you very much for being here with us. It's always great to get bookish with you. And for the folks who joined us after the fact, if you have additional questions, feel free to pop them in the comments and we can forward them on to Rob if there's anything that needs following up on. But until we meet again, we're going to be back next Wednesday for a bookish moment, 4:30 p.m. Here on YouTube. And so we'll be able to spend Valentine's Day together, which is exciting. But until then, everyone, have a wonderful rest of your week, your weekend, and stay bookish. Bye, everybody.